Hello everybody, how are you guys? We're continuing our series of looks at unheralded, or at least players from the rich sports history of Pittsburgh teams that we feel like should get a spotlight back on them so we can remember the contributions they made to each of their teams and the fun times that the fans here had. Now, I wasn't here. I'm not a Pittsburgh person, so I don't know specifically the sports history, but I got some information from somebody that was waiting in line behind me at Starbucks that gave me some insights into players that we can look at. The guy had a Go Steelers hat on, but he was also wearing Crocs. So take what he says with a grain of salt, guys. But he mentioned there's three Steelers we'd want to look at in our tribute to unheralded players from the past. A lot of times these are fan favorites that stick in people's minds. For example, there was Steely Manowski from 1929. Now, Steely, in those days, remember, the rules were a little looser, and Steely was rumored to carry brass knuckles in his hands when he lined up to the line of scrimmage as a offensive guard. And the bruises and broken cheekbones of many of the opposing players often brought him under the scrutiny of the league. But each time the legal defense team for the Steelers was able to get him out of it by explaining that the players on the other teams drank a lot in those days and probably stumbled and hit something with their cheekbone, and it wasn't Steely, but nonetheless, Steely Manowski, he couldn't get away from that nickname, Steely. His God-given name was Harold Steely Manowski from 1929 Steelers, playing such a major role in the success of those teams. But, of course, controversy hovered over him, and a lot of people want to put an asterisk against his name, the things he accomplished. But, you know, results are results, and if you got to break out the brass knuckles sometimes, well, until the rules prohibit it, there you go. So, number two on the list of unheralded Steeler Nation favorites from 1934, you had T-Ball Jones. Now, T-Ball grew up playing baseball and was one of the first players in history to join a T-ball league. When he was 2 years old, he was playing T-ball. And by the time he was 5, he was being recruited by the Pirates, actually. But football eventually became his love, and T-Ball Jones came up with his own play. The guy was a running back in 1934. And he loved to, you heard of the Statue of Liberty? This was the old T-ball, where the quarterback just held the ball, the football, in the tips of his fingers at waist high. And here comes T-ball flying by at 100 miles an hour, picking it right off the tee. And what he would do, you'd think he'd scoop it into his arms and run with it, but no. He kind of chopped at it like a 9-iron, and the ball would go flipping over the line that it's rushing. So then he'd run around the scrimmage of the pile of players battling it. Once the play was underway, they're all pushing and shoving. He'd run around them, and here comes his little chop shot over the top, and he'd right off the tee, and he'd pick it up, and man, that guy was gone. T-Ball Jones, one of the unheralded fan favorites from the history of Steeler Nation. And finally, number three, you had old Great Temples Woodworth. Now, Great Temples Woodworth played in 1947, and he was pretty old for a player at that age. But remember, during the war, they didn't have as many players as they needed, so they called on some of the old guys. That's why they called him Great Temples. He was an older dude. He was probably 60, 70 years old when he was playing with the Steelers. And so he didn't have as much, lower body strength as you need sometimes to be on the line. But Great Temples was known as a side swiper. So instead of blocking you straight on, he'd kind of hold his body to the side and let you trip over his shoelaces. And that was one technique his side swipers used, but there, he was protecting his flank because, he didn't have the strength of some of those players. But he used his mind. He used the power of his mind, and so often you find Steelers players doing that. Some of these Steeler players using their mind rather than their physical strength. And that has kind of been a feature or something, characteristic, you could say, of Steelers teams throughout the years, using their mind power in addition to their physical strength. And, of course, old White Temples, he didn't really have a lot of physical strength at all at the age of 70, whatever he was. But he was very effective, and then by the time the war was over, his playing role diminished because some of the regular aged, or let's say the more youthful players came back from the war, and his role diminished on the team. But again, he was a fan favorite because, remember, this is a guy that in the pre-games, he'd walk around in the tailgating section, and he'd have a cup, and the cup would say, "Throw in a quarter. I'll guess your number of Steeler fans in your family." And they'd throw in a quarter, and he'd get it every time. And it turned out he had inside information, but it was that kind of stuff that made him a fan favorite, guys. And it's number 2 on our list of unheralded fan favorites. And number 3, guys, and a real winner is going to be Pat Consalto, an Italian guy from Little Italy, right here in Pittsburgh. Now, Pat Consalto, again, not a big guy, but a running back with speed and leaping ability. And it turns out Consalto is Italian for leaping lizard. And